Hey there, welcome back to your first lesson of Unit 1. This video is titled Lesson 1, Globalization and Identity. In this video, you will begin to understand the basics of how globalization shapes your individual and collective identity. The video lesson questions for this lesson are as follows. Number 1, what is identity? Number 2, what are some factors that shape and influence our identity? Number 3, what is the difference between individual and collective identity? Number 4, what are some ways that we express our individual and collective identity? And number 5, how does globalization shape our individual and collective identity? So let's begin. First, a quick review of the understanding of globalization from the Introduction to Globalization video that you watched first. Remember from the Introduction to Globalization, the definition of globalization? Globalization is the process by which the world's citizens are becoming increasingly connected and interdependent. How does globalization shape our identity? Well, first we need to understand the concept of identity, what shapes our identity, how we express our identity, and the difference between individual and collective identity. Identity is essentially who we are. It includes the factors that shape who we are, that set us apart from everyone else. There are many factors that shape and influence our identity, and we will examine these factors in this video. Some influences on our identity include culture, language, media, family, government, relationship to the land, environment, gender, religion, spirituality, and ideology. Culture shapes our identity through the social behaviors and norms people learn from each other in society. Culture might include the customs and traditions that are related to your ethnicity. For example, the Ukrainian culture has certain social behaviors and customs that are different from the Chinese culture. Pop culture also has certain social behaviors and norms that tend to be more trendy and worldwide. Language is how we communicate. We learn language very early in life before we can speak from our parents and the people around us. As we grow older, we learn new languages, maybe a second language or maybe a more non-traditional language. The way we communicate has a major influence on who we are. Media can have a powerful influence on our identity as it is all around us. TV, movies, music, social media, advertising, they all have messages about social behaviors and norms. Media communicates to us positive and negative images and behaviors that might influence what we believe and accept as normal. Family shapes our identity as they are the people who we spend most of our formative years with. Your parents, siblings, and extended family shape your identity through the social behaviors and expectations that they demonstrate. Government shapes our identity through government programs and policies that it creates that shape our society. One country's government may have certain ideas about how society should be structured than another country's government. And often this will shape the social behaviors and norms of people within that country. Relationship to the land is how the land and water we live on and around us shapes our identity. People who live on a farm in Alberta will have much different set of norms and social behaviors than people who live in Canada's Arctic or in the Maritimes close to the ocean. Someone who lives in a rural area and who hunts wildlife, which is part of the land we live on, will have a much different identity than someone who lives in the city. A similar factor is environment, which includes our beliefs and values about the environment we live in. For example, someone who identifies with being an environmentalist, who believes in protecting the environment and that humans are responsible for causing climate change, will have a different social behavior and norm than someone who might work in an oil patch and relies on the oil industry for their livelihood. Gender influences our identity in that you might have certain social behaviors and norms taught to you by depending on if you are a male versus a female. These days, gender roles are being changed as traditional gender roles are being challenged and rethought. Religion and spirituality have a very similar influence on your identity. Religion refers to the traditional social behaviors and norms that are taught with belonging to a certain religion like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, etc. Each of these religions have religious expectations about morality, of what is right and wrong. Spirituality is similar to religion, but spiritual beliefs don't necessarily adhere to a specific traditional religion, but might have a certain social expectation or norm about what is acceptable and not acceptable. Someone who believes in holistic spirituality may have a different identity than someone who belongs to an Orthodox Catholic church. Lastly, ideology refers to the beliefs and values about how we think the world should operate. These beliefs might be about political, economic, or social expectations and norms. For example, someone who believes in social equality and has a more liberal ideology might have different social behaviors than someone who doesn't believe in social equality, might be a little bit more conservative and believes that the best and brightest should rise to the top. So now that we understand what identity is and the factors that shape our identity, let's look at the difference between individual and collective identity. Individual identity is what makes you unique and different from all the other billions of people on this planet. Individual identity can include your physical characteristics, your genetic makeup, your likes and the dislikes, and the understanding that makes you different from everyone else. Collective identity is the elements of your identity that come from belonging to a group or a collective. Collective identity can include the feeling of belonging to a sports team or to your family or being a member of a nation or a country. Collective identity might include shared characteristics that you would have in common with other members of the same collective you belong to. So, what's the difference between individual identity and collective identity? Let's take a teenager living in Canada, like you, for example. Teenagers love to show their individual identity all the time as they are in their formative years. People in their teenage years tend to learn about themselves, what they like and they don't like, and how they're unique. Some even get a little offended when they are treated the same like everyone else and want to be treated as an individual. However, teenagers also have a desire to want to belong to something bigger than themselves. For example, playing in a hockey or a basketball team, being a 4-H member, or just finding a crowd of like-minded friends to hang out with. As well, a teenager living in Canada is, well, a Canadian. Being Canadian is part of your collective identity and comes with the feeling of belonging to a nation. Interestingly enough, the right to belong to a nation and having a nationality is one of the 30 human rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So in summary, individual identity is what makes you unique. Collective identity is belonging to a group. Clear enough? Okay, let's move on. There are several ways that people can express their individual and collective identities. These are the ways that we interpret our identity and communicate them to others. These might include art, language, traditions, religion and spirituality, role modeling, attire, relationship to the land, and ideological beliefs. We express our identity through art, whether it's dance, music, painting, sculpting, visual arts, and a whole lot more. Some people are very artistic, and they love to express their identity through their art. Traditions includes the customs and social behaviors we use to express our identity. A tradition that is common that at Christmas time is putting up a Christmas tree and wrapping presents. Another tradition is paying respect to members of our military during Remembrance Day. These are ways that we express our traditions. Language includes the formal and informal ways we communicate to others, be it through speaking English or French or another language, or through the types of languages such as sign language, slang words, or texting language. We communicate our religion and spirituality by going to church or other forms of worship and practicing religious customs. Or we might communicate our spirituality through practicing more holistic or spiritual practices, such as ceremony called a smudge, which is an Aboriginal spiritual practice. Role modeling might include expressing our identity as a role model, such as a big brother or a big sister, or being a coach or a teacher. Attire includes expressing our identity by what we wear, whether we wear jewelry, piercings, tattoos, or clothing that expresses our individual identity, such as a Team Canada jersey during the Olympics to express our collective identity. We express our relationship to the land by doing things like hunting and fishing or camping. Or if you're Aboriginal, you can participate in a ceremony such as a Sundance or a powwow. Lastly, we express our ideological beliefs by doing things like participating in a rally or a protest, or having a debate with someone about a government policy. In summary, we have a lot of ways we express our individual and collective identities. Lastly, we're going to connect what you've learned about identity to the concept of globalization, which is how people around the world are interconnected and interdependent. One easy way to connect identity to globalization is look at the role of media in our lives. Our individual identity is greatly shaped by media. We all have our favorite music, TV show, or movie. We all love to express our identity through posting things like our thoughts on Snapchat or Twitter. A lot of the media in our lives is global media, such that chances are most of your favorite TV shows, movies, and music come from outside of Canada. And likely they're from the United States. Not all of them, but most of them are from the United States. This goes especially for popular TV, music, and movies. Another example of the connection between individual identity and globalization can be your favorite food. I don't know about you, but one of my favorite places to eat is a food court in a mall. In a food court, you have your choices of a dozen or more different restaurants, all offering something different. Have you ever noticed that in a food court, you can usually choose between Asian, Mexican, Greek, Italian, Japanese, and many other different ethnic varieties of food? And then there's the popular fast food chains like Subway, McDonald's, and Dairy Queen. Going to a food court in a mall is a good example of how globalization can shape your identity. There are a variety of different foods from around the world you can choose from according to your individual likes in food. As for the popular fast food chains, those are available over the world too. As for collective identity, globalization shapes our collective identity through our collective cultural beliefs and traditions. Unless you are First Nations or Inuit, most Canadians have an ethnic background that originates from another country outside of Canada. The majority of Canadians are of a European ethnic background, like English, French, German, Norwegian, Dutch, etc. Other Canadians might be of an Asian, South American, African, or Middle Eastern ethnicity. We are all similar in that we're all Canadians. But the fact that most Canadians have an ethnic heritage from outside of Canada is an example of how global influence on our collective identity can affect us as being Canadians. The term for this is known as pluralism, which describes how Canadians have a diverse variety of ethnic and cultural identities, but we all know that we live as one united nation and everyone is equal. This brings us to the end of Lesson 1, Globalization and Identity. In class, you will discuss the concepts of identity and how globalization shape our identity further. And your assignment is you will communicate as many different ways that globalization shapes your identity, your individual and collective identity. Until then, ciao.